The beam sliced through darkness. Blood gleamed on silver. A police badge lay twisted in the gravel, its owner gasping beneath the oak tree where no cop should ever be alone. Wade Thompson's flashlight trembled as Rex pressed his muzzle against the woman's neck, whimpering in a way that made Wade's chest tighten. Officer Hudson's uniform was torn, her radio silent, her breathing shallow and desperate. Rex circled once, then dropped into a stance Wade hadn't seen since their last day on the force 3 years ago. A perfect K9 guard position. Wade's hands shook as muscle memory kicked in, pressing against wounds that spoke of execution, not accident. The German shepherd's eyes locked onto his, and in that moment Wade knew their quiet life of fixing engines and staying invisible was over. Because what Rex did next didn't just save a dying cop's life. It exposed a secret that would make every officer in the county realize the greatest heroes sometimes hide behind the most ordinary faces. The alarm clock screamed at 4:30 in the morning, but Wade Thompson was already awake. He sat on the edge of his narrow bed, calloused hands wrapped around lukewarm coffee that tasted like burnt promises. Rex lay by the door, ears twitched toward every sound from the apartment hallway. The German shepherd's breathing matched Wade's restless rhythm, both haunted by dreams that felt more like memories. Through thin walls, Wade could hear his 8-year-old son Tyler shifting in sleep, probably dreaming of Saturday morning cartoons and cereal that didn't come from the dollar store. Wade's reflection stared back from the bathroom mirror, stubble framing hollow cheeks and eyes that had seen too much. 3 years of working double shifts at Murphy's auto shop. 3 years of pretending he was just another mechanic with grease under his fingernails. His hands moved automatically through the morning routine, muscle memory guiding him while his mind wandered to forbidden places. Rex appeared in the doorway, watching with intelligent brown eyes that seemed to understand everything Wade couldn't say out loud. The dog's presence was both comfort and reminder, a living piece of the life they'd left behind when everything went sideways. Tyler emerged from his bedroom like a sleepy tornado, dark hair sticking up in impossible directions and one sock hanging off his toes. The boy's grin could light up the darkest corners of Wade's soul, innocent and bright in a way that made his chest ache with fierce protection. Tyler dropped to his knees beside Rex, wrapping thin arms around the dog's neck and whispering secrets. Wade watched them together, his son and his former partner, and felt the familiar twist of guilt in his stomach. Tyler deserved a father who didn't wake up screaming, a dog who was just a pet, a life that didn't carry the weight of ghosts and unfinished business. The call came at 6:15, just as Wade was loading his toolbox into the back of his ancient pickup truck. Murphy's gruff voice crackled through the phone, desperation bleeding through his usual grumpy exterior like oil through worn gaskets. Emergency repair call on the outskirts of town, a broken-down, semi-blocking traffic on Highway 9, cash payment if Wade could get there within the hour. Rex lifted his head from the passenger seat, nostrils flaring as if he could smell trouble through the morning air. Wade's gut twisted with unease he couldn't name, the same instinct that had kept him alive through 5 years of police work. Highway 9 stretched like a black ribbon through farmland that hadn't seen rain in weeks, corn stalks brown and brittle in fields that whispered secrets to the wind. Wade's headlights cut through darkness, illuminating road signs and mile markers that counted down to nowhere in particular. Rex sat perfectly still in the passenger seat, alert and focused in a way that made the hair on Wade's arms stand up. The dog's training ran bone deep, instincts honed by years of walking into danger with nothing but trust and determination. Wade's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, knuckles white against cracked plastic, as memories tried to surface like bodies in deep water. The semi-truck sat jackknifed across both lanes like a sleeping giant, its hazard lights blinking orange warnings into the pre-dawn gloom. Wade pulled over, gravel crunching under his tires as he surveyed the scene with professional eyes that had learned to spot details others missed. No driver visible in the cab, no signs of mechanical failure, no skid marks on the asphalt to suggest sudden braking or loss of control. Rex jumped down from the truck and immediately went to work, nose to the ground in a pattern that looked random but followed the precise grid of a trained search. Wade grabbed his flashlight and toolbox, but his eyes kept drifting to the tree line, where shadows moved wrong and silence felt heavy as a loaded gun. Rex's growl started low and built like distant thunder, a sound that raised every hair on Wade's body and sent his hand reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. The dog had frozen 20 feet from the oak tree, every muscle coiled tight as a spring, ears forward and tail rigid with alertness. Wade followed the line of Rex's stare and saw her there in the circle of his flashlight beam, crumpled like discarded laundry against the massive trunk. Officer Hudson's blonde hair fanned across dead leaves, her face pale as moonlight, except for dark stains spreading across her navy uniform. Her badge caught the light and threw it back in desperate flashes, a beacon that had failed to bring help in time. The radio on Hudson's belt crackled with static and distant voices calling her name, 10 codes mixing with personal pleas that grew more desperate with each unanswered transmission. Wade pressed his ear close to catch whispered words that barely escaped her blue-tinged lips, coordinates and badge numbers that meant nothing to a civilian, but everything to someone who used to carry the same weight of responsibility. Rex circled them both, nose working overtime, to process scents and information that painted a picture Wade wasn't sure he wanted to see. The dog's behavior shifted into full working mode, positioning himself between Wade and the road while maintaining sight lines to the tree line. Hudson's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy with pain. But she gripped Wade's wrist with surprising strength when he tried to pull away to call for help. Wade's fingers found the pressure points he'd memorized years ago, applying direct pressure to wounds that wept red secrets into the thirsty earth. His mind raced through field medicine protocols while his eyes scanned for additional injuries, exits and entries, signs of what had gone wrong in this quiet place where only crickets should be witnesses. Rex had moved into perimeter watch, ears rotating like radar dishes as he monitored approaches from every direction. The dog's alertness told Wade they weren't alone out here, that whatever had happened to Officer Hudson might not be finished yet. Hudson's breathing grew more labored, each exhale a struggle that sent pink foam bubbling from the corner of her mouth. The shell casings glinted like fallen stars in the beam of Wade's flashlight, brass evidence scattered in a pattern that told stories of panic and precision mixed together. Rex had found them first, of course, his nose leading him to each piece of the puzzle with methodical thoroughness of a dog trained to find what others missed. 9mm rounds, recently fired, still carrying the acrid scent of gunpowder that made Rex's nostrils twitch with recognition. Wade counted them without touching, old habits keeping his hands away from evidence, while his mind reconstructed angles and trajectories. Too many shots for a single assailant, too spread out for panic fire, too precise for amateur work. Hudson had been targeted by someone who knew what they were doing, someone who'd planned this ambush with military precision. Rex's low growl directed Wade's attention to footprints pressed into soft earth near the tree trunk, boot treads that belonged to someone heavy enough to leave deep impressions in ground that should have been hard-packed. The prints led away from the scene in a straight line toward the road. No hesitation or backtracking, just purposeful movement from someone confident they had time to clean up loose ends. Wade followed the trail with his flashlight, reading the story written in disturbed soil and broken vegetation. The shooter had waited here, patient and hidden, until Hudson arrived alone and vulnerable. They'd used the semi-truck as bait, counting on a dedicated cop's instinct to investigate and help. The torn earpiece lay half-buried in fallen leaves, its wire twisted and deliberately severed where it had been ripped from Hudson's ear. Wade examined it without disturbing the placement, noting fresh damage that spoke of intentional sabotage rather than accident. Someone had made sure Hudson couldn't call for backup, couldn't report her location or situation before the trap was sprung. Rex sniffed around the device with professional interest, his body language shifting into focused intensity Wade remembered from their working days. The dog's training kicked in automatically, processing scents and information that would have been invisible to civilian eyes. Wade felt familiar tightness in his chest that came with recognizing patterns he'd hoped never to see again. Hudson's fingers fumbled weakly at her duty belt, trying to remove something with hands that shook from blood loss and shock. Wade helped her extract a small digital recorder, its red light still blinking to show active recording despite everything that had happened. She pressed it into his palm with desperate urgency, her lips moving in whispered words that carried the weight of dying confessions. Names and dates, badge numbers and locations, evidence of corruption that ran deep enough to get a good cop killed for asking the wrong questions. Wade understood now why she'd shaken her head when he'd reached for his phone, why her eyes kept darting toward the road like she expected someone to return and finish what they'd started. The sound of approaching vehicles carried through the still air like distant thunder, engines running hard on the empty highway that should have been deserted at this hour. Rex's ears snapped forward, his entire body going rigid with alertness as he processed the threat level of multiple cars moving fast in their direction. Wade counted headlights through the trees, at least 3 vehicles traveling in formation like a convoy or hunting party. His blood ran cold as understanding hit him like a physical blow. Hudson had been right to fear the people who were supposed to protect her. The dirty cops who'd set up this ambush were coming back to make sure their loose ends were properly tied, expecting to find nothing but a dead officer and a crime scene that would never tell the real story. Wade pocketed the recorder and scooped Hudson into his arms, her dead weight testing muscles that had grown soft from years of lifting wrenches instead of wounded partners. Rex took point automatically, moving through darkness with silent precision as he led them away from open ground where approaching headlights would soon wash away every shadow. The dog's training ran deeper than muscle memory, instincts honed by years of protecting and serving, now focused on keeping his pack alive through whatever came next. Wade's legs burned as he carried Hudson towards the tree line, following Rex's lead through terrain that would provide cover and concealment from the hunters closing in behind them. Hudson stirred in his arms, consciousness flickering back just long enough for her to whisper coordinates that might be salvation or trap depending on who was listening. The abandoned hunting blind sat like a forgotten gravestone among scrub oak and wild blackberry, camouflaged well enough that Wade almost missed it, even with Rex's nose guiding them straight to safety. Wade settled Hudson inside the small structure, her breathing shallow but steady as shock tried to drag her under again. Rex positioned himself at the entrance, every sense focused on the men who were searching for them with systematic precision. Through gaps in weathered wood, Wade could see flashlight beams sweeping the area where they'd been minutes before, voices calling out in tones that mixed false concern with barely concealed urgency. 3 men in police uniforms, moving with coordinated efficiency of a SWAT team rather than scattered panic of cops responding to emergency. Hudson's eyes opened fully for the first time since Wade found her. Pupils dilated, but tracking movement as awareness returned in painful waves. She tried to speak, but managed only whispers that carried the weight of desperate truth, fragments of investigation that had cost her everything and might cost them all their lives before dawn broke. Wade leaned close to catch her words, names, and places that painted a picture of corruption reaching all the way to the top of local law enforcement. Drugs flowing through evidence lockup, arrest records disappearing, witness statements altered or destroyed to protect the guilty and condemn the innocent. Hudson had been building a case against her own department, gathering evidence that would have sent dozens of cops to prison if she'd lived long enough to present it. The radio chatter from the search team crackled through darkness, 10 codes and coordinates mixing with crude speculation about how long it would take to find the body and sanitize the scene. Wade listened with growing horror as men he'd once respected discussed covering up murder with casual professionalism of people who'd done it before. Sergeant Mill's voice cut through the others, authoritative and cold as he directed the search pattern and timeline for destroying evidence. They had until sunrise to make Officer Hudson disappear permanently, to clean up the scene and create a story that would satisfy internal affairs and keep their operation running smoothly. Wade felt Hudson tense beside him as she recognized voices of colleagues who'd shared coffee and war stories, men she'd trusted with her life who were now hunting her like prey. Mill's flashlight beam swept close enough to illuminate dust motes dancing in the abandoned blind, close enough that Wade could count service stripes on his uniform sleeve and see barely contained fury in his weathered face. The sergeant was talking quietly into his radio, coordinating with someone back at headquarters who was tracking patrol units and dispatch logs to make sure no official record existed of Hudson's last known location. Wade realized they were witnessing the machinery of institutional corruption in full operation, watching good old boy networks that had taken decades to build protect themselves with ruthless efficiency. Hudson gripped his arm with surprising strength, pressing something small and hard into his palm alongside the recorder. A flash drive, encrypted and password protected, containing enough evidence to bring down everyone involved if it ever reached honest hands. Wade felt familiar calm descend over him like armor, the same focused clarity that had kept him alive through 5 years of police work and 3 years of pretending to be dead to the world. His hands moved automatically to check Hudson's pulse and breathing, medic training taking precedence over everything else as he calculated how much time she had left without proper medical attention. Rex was watching him with those intelligent brown eyes, waiting for orders that would determine whether they all lived or died in this forgotten place, where right and wrong had gotten tangled up with badges and corruption. Wade made his decision the way he always had, based on what was right rather than what was safe or smart or likely to succeed. Hudson deserved to live long enough to see her evidence put the right people in prison, and Rex deserved better than dying for someone else's crimes in a place where no one would ever know their sacrifice mattered. The explosion of violence started with Rex's warning growl, a sound that raised every hair on Wade's body and sent his combat instincts into overdrive before his conscious mind processed the threat. Mills had found their hiding spot through some combination of luck and systematic searching, his flashlight beam cutting through the blind's entrance just as Rex launched himself forward with silent fury. The German Shepherd hit the sergeant center mass, 80 pounds of trained muscle and protective rage, driving the man backward into scrub oak with enough force to crack ribs and shatter confidence. Wade rolled Hudson deeper into the blind and came up with hands that remembered how to strip weapons from stunned opponents, muscle memory from his police academy days, taking control as training overrode 3 years of civilian softness. Mills's service weapon felt familiar and foreign at the same time, polymer grip warm from body heat and magazine full of possibilities for survival or damnation. The other 2 officers came running at the sound of their sergeant's distress, flashlights and weapons drawn as they converged on the hunting blind with tactical precision that spoke of military or SWAT training. Wade recognized them both despite the years and darkness. Officers Kane and Rodriguez from the County Drug Task Force, decorated veterans with clean records and community respect that made their presence here a betrayal of everything law enforcement claimed to represent. Rex released Mills and flowed like liquid shadow towards the new threats, moving with controlled aggression of a dog trained to neutralize armed suspects without unnecessary violence. Wade found himself caught between his protective instincts and the horrible familiarity of pointing a weapon at fellow police officers, men he'd shared shifts and stories with back when he thought the world was simpler than it actually turned out to be. Kane's voice cut through the tension like a rusty blade, casual and conversational as if they were discussing weather instead of murder in the pre-dawn darkness. He wanted to know where Hudson had hidden the evidence, what copies existed, and who else might have access to information that could destroy careers and send good cops to prison for doing what it took to survive in a system that didn't pay enough to matter. Wade listened to the easy rationalization of corruption, the familiar litany of excuses that turned honest police work into organized crime with badges and public salaries. Rex held position between them and the corrupt officers, reading body language and threat levels with precision of a dog trained to protect and serve rather than intimidate and destroy. Wade felt the weight of Hudson's evidence in his pocket, digital proof of crimes that reached deep enough into the department to make his former colleagues desperate enough to kill anyone who threatened their operation. Rodriguez made the mistake of assuming Rex was just a pet rather than a partner, stepping sideways to get a better angle on Wade while ignoring the German Shepherd's fixed stare and coiled readiness. The dog moved like controlled lightning, flowing across the distance between them with silent precision that spoke of hundreds of training scenarios and real-world applications. Rodriguez's weapon discharged skyward as Rex's weight drove him to the ground, the sharp crack of gunfire echoing through the forest and disturbing sleeping birds into startled flight. Wade used the distraction to close distance with Kane, muscle memory guiding him through disarming techniques that felt rusty but effective as years of civilian life fell away like shed skin. Mills tried to regain control of the situation from his position on the ground, reaching for backup weapon or radio or anything that might shift the balance back toward corrupt authority. Hudson forced herself upright despite blood loss and shock, her voice carrying enough command presence to freeze all three corrupt officers in place as she began reciting their rights in a tone that brooked no argument or negotiation. The county sheriff's department badge felt heavy in Hudson's palm as she held it up like a talisman against the corruption that had nearly killed her, silver metal catching starlight and throwing it back with fierce determination. Wade kept Kane covered while Rex maintained control over Rodriguez, the German shepherd's training evident in the way he applied just enough pressure to immobilize without causing permanent damage. Mills struggled to sit up against the oak tree, his face a mask of rage and desperation as he realized that 20 years of careful corruption was about to unravel in a single night of violence and exposure. Hudson's voice grew stronger as she detailed the charges that would be filed against all three men: conspiracy and attempted murder, adding to the drug trafficking and evidence tampering that formed the foundation of their criminal enterprise. The distant sound of sirens carried through the pre-dawn air like salvation or damnation, depending on which side of the badge you stood on when the cavalry finally arrived. Wade listened to the approaching units with mixed emotions, unsure whether honest cops or more corruption was racing towards their location in response to gunfire and radio silence from patrol units that should have checked in hours ago. Rex maintained his position over Rodriguez while scanning for new threats, his training sophisticated enough to distinguish between friend and foe, based on scent and behavior patterns learned through years of experience with law enforcement personnel. Hudson struggled to her feet with Wade's help, determination overriding blood loss as she prepared to brief whatever officers arrived first and ensure that evidence reached honest hands before it could be suppressed or destroyed. Mills made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation, promising promotions and retirement funds and all the things that had corrupted good cops into criminals over the decades of institutional rot. Chief Morrison's voice crackled through Mills' radio with increasing urgency, demanding status reports from officers who were supposed to have cleaned up their mess and returned to normal patrol duties before dawn brought scrutiny from day-shift personnel. Wade listened to the corrupt chief's barely concealed panic as radio silence stretched beyond acceptable limits, realizing that the conspiracy reached higher up the chain of command than anyone had suspected. Hudson gripped the evidence recorder tighter, understanding that her investigation had uncovered systematic corruption that would require federal intervention to prosecute effectively. Rex's ears swiveled towards the approaching sirens, his body language shifting as he processed the scents and sounds of multiple vehicles converging on their location from different directions. Wade felt familiar tightness in his chest that came with not knowing whether rescue or danger was racing toward them through the darkness. The next few minutes would determine whether justice or corruption won this particular battle, whether good cops or bad ones arrived first to secure the scene and control the narrative that would be written in official reports. The state police cruisers arrived with authority that cut through county politics like searchlights through fog, investigators who answered to different chains of command and carried federal oversight that made local corruption irrelevant. Detective Captain Sarah Walsh stepped out of the lead vehicle with confident bearing of someone who'd spent 20 years cleaning up messes left by dirty cops and corrupt departments. Wade felt relief wash over him as he recognized honest authority in the captain's approach, professional competence unmarked by the casual corruption that had infected the county sheriff's department. Rex relaxed slightly but maintained alert positioning, his training sophisticated enough to distinguish between different law enforcement agencies and their relative threat levels. Hudson managed a weak smile as she handed over the evidence that had nearly cost her life, digital proof of crimes that would take months to fully investigate and prosecute. Mills and his associate sat in sullen silence as state investigators secured the scene and began documenting evidence that would send them to federal prison for decades. Wade watched justice begin to unfold with methodical precision of honest police work, feeling a satisfaction that had been missing from his life for 3 years. Tyler's sleepy voice crackled through Wade's phone as dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of hope and possibility. His son's innocent question about whether Dad was coming home for breakfast carrying weight that almost broke Wade's carefully maintained composure. Wade assured his boy that everything was fine, and Dad would be there soon with stories, and maybe even good news about their future circumstances. Rex had settled into relaxed alertness as the immediate danger passed, his body language shifting from tactical readiness to the patient waiting that characterized professional dogs between assignments. Hudson was loaded into an ambulance with medical attention that would heal her wounds and professional protection that would keep her alive to testify against the corruption she'd uncovered. Wade felt the familiar ache of duty fulfilled, mixing with uncertainty about what came next, whether his quiet civilian life was over or just beginning a new chapter that included purpose beyond fixing engines and staying invisible. Captain Walsh approached with questions that would need answers and offers that might change everything, recognition flickering in her eyes as she studied Wade and Rex with the interest of someone who recognized former law enforcement when she saw it. The hospital waiting room smelled like disinfectant and fear. Uncomfortable chairs arranged in patterns that discouraged conversation while encouraging patience from families and friends who had nowhere else to be. Wade sat with Rex at his feet, both of them exhausted but alert as they waited for word about Hudson's condition and prognosis for recovery. Tyler had been picked up by Mrs. Chen from next door, a kind woman who asked no questions and made excellent soup for times when life got complicated beyond normal explanation. The German Shepherd attracted attention from medical staff who recognized training and breeding that marked him as something more than ordinary pet. Questions that Wade deflected with practiced ease, born of 3 years hiding in plain sight. Captain Walsh appeared periodically with updates about the investigation and increasingly specific questions about Wade's background and current circumstances, professional interest that suggested opportunities might be opening for someone with the right skills and motivation. Wade found himself thinking about purpose and direction, whether fixing engines was enough satisfaction for someone who'd once dedicated his life to protecting and serving something larger than personal comfort. The federal prosecutor's office had taken direct control of the corruption investigation, bringing resources and authority that guaranteed thorough examination of evidence and prosecution of everyone involved, regardless of rank or political connections. Wade gave his statement to investigators who treated him with respect and professional courtesy, recognizing his role in preserving evidence and protecting a valuable witness from assassination by corrupt colleagues. Hudson's condition had stabilized overnight, surgery successful in repairing damage from bullets that had been intended to silence her permanently rather than merely wound or intimidate. Rex lay quietly beside Wade's chair, processing the stream of unfamiliar people and medical equipment with calm alertness that marked him as former working dog rather than anxious pet. Wade felt the weight of decisions pressing down on him like storm clouds gathering overhead, choices that would determine whether he continued hiding from his past or embraced possibilities that Captain Walsh had begun outlining during their increasingly frequent conversations. The recorder and flash drive had yielded enough evidence to prosecute 37 current and former law enforcement officers, a corruption network that had operated for nearly 2 decades before Hudson's investigation brought it crashing down. Captain Walsh found Wade in the hospital cafeteria, nursing coffee that tasted like burnt hope, and watching Rex charm pediatric patients who were delighted to meet a real police dog, even if he was technically retired. The state police captain sat across from Wade with directness of someone who'd learned not to waste time on subtle approaches when important business needed discussion. She'd done her homework on Wade Thompson, former K-9 officer who'd left the sheriff's department under circumstances that made more sense now that the scope of departmental corruption had become clear. Rex's service record spoke for itself, commendations and successful operations that marked him as one of the best narcotics detection dogs in state history before his career ended alongside Wade's 3 years ago. Walsh outlined opportunities for someone with Wade's background and Rex's skills, federal task force positions that came with resources and authority to make real differences in communities where local law enforcement had lost its way. Wade listened with growing interest to descriptions of work that might satisfy the part of his soul that had withered during 3 years of fixing engines instead of fixing problems that mattered to people who couldn't protect themselves. Tyler's excitement was infectious when Wade explained that Rex might get to be a police dog again, that Dad's special skills might be useful to good people who wanted to catch bad guys and help communities where crime had gotten out of control. The boy's questions came rapid fire as imagination painted pictures of adventures and heroism that made Wade's chest tight with pride and purpose he'd forgotten was possible. Rex seemed to understand the conversation even without words, his posture shifting toward the alert readiness that had defined his working years before retirement and civilian life had dulled his edges. Wade thought about Hudson lying in her hospital bed, wounded but alive, because someone had been in the right place at the right time, with skills and courage enough to matter when it counted most. The federal task force assignment would mean travel and danger, long hours away from Tyler and responsibilities that came with serious consequences for failure or mistakes. But it would also mean purpose beyond personal survival, chances to protect people who deserved better than corrupt cops, and criminal organizations that wore badges while they destroyed communities from within. The swearing-in ceremony took place 6 weeks later in a federal courthouse that smelled like justice and possibility. Wade's right hand raised as he recited oaths that felt familiar and new at the same time. Tyler sat in the front row, wearing his best clothes and a grin that could have powered small cities, pride radiating from his 8-year-old frame as he watched his father become a federal law enforcement officer. Rex wore a new badge and collar that marked him as Task Force K-9 Unit 7, trained and certified for narcotics detection, evidence recovery, and suspect apprehension across multiple jurisdictions. Hudson attended, despite still recovering from her wounds, her presence a reminder that good cops were worth the risks and sacrifices that came with fighting corruption wherever it tried to take root. Captain Walsh administered the oath with professional dignity that couldn't quite hide her satisfaction at adding Wade and Rex to her team, experienced professionals who'd already proven their worth under circumstances that would have broken lesser partnerships. Wade felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like familiar armor, protection and burden, combined in ways that made sense only to people who'd chosen service over safety. The task force headquarters buzzed with activity that reminded Wade why he'd missed law enforcement during his 3 years in civilian exile. Dedicated professionals working cases that mattered to communities across the state. Rex adapted to the new environment with ease that spoke to his breeding and training, intelligence and loyalty that made him valuable partner rather than mere tool for detecting contraband or tracking suspects. Wade's first assignment involved a small town where the entire police department had been compromised by drug money, honest cops driven out or silenced while criminals operated with official protection and community resources. Tyler would stay with Mrs. Chen during the operation, understanding that Dad's work was important, even when it meant separation and uncertainty about when normal family life might resume. Wade packed his gear with hands that remembered routine from years of preparation for dangerous assignments, checking equipment and reviewing intelligence reports that painted pictures of corruption and violence that demanded professional response. Rex watched from his bed beside Wade's desk, brown eyes alert with anticipation for work that would challenge his skills and satisfy instincts that civilian life had never fully engaged. The small town of Cedar Falls looked like America as it should be. Tree-lined streets and friendly faces hiding corruption that had metastasized through local government like cancer through healthy tissue. Wade and Rex arrived as father and son looking for fresh start in quiet community. Cover story that allowed them to observe and gather intelligence without triggering defensive responses from criminals who wore badges and carried authority they'd betrayed. The local police chief welcomed them with hospitality that felt genuine until Wade noticed details that didn't match small-town innocence, expensive watches and vehicles that suggested income sources beyond municipal salaries. Rex sensed the tension immediately, his training sophisticated enough to detect stress chemicals and aggressive postures that marked dangerous people regardless of uniforms or official titles. Wade began building relationships and gathering information through casual conversations and community involvement, patient work that would take weeks or months to yield actionable intelligence. Tyler called every evening with reports about school and Mrs. Chen's cooking, innocent chatter that kept Wade grounded in purpose beyond professional satisfaction and career advancement. The breakthrough came when Rex alerted on the police station evidence locker during a community tour designed to build trust between citizens and law enforcement, the German Shepherd's reaction subtle enough that only Wade recognized professional interest in contraband that should have been secured and catalogued. Wade memorized layouts and security measures while making appropriate civilian comments about impressive facilities and professional operations, mental notes that would support federal search warrants when sufficient evidence justified more aggressive investigation. The police chief's wife drove a luxury car that cost more than her husband's annual salary, small detail that added to growing picture of systematic corruption funded by drug trafficking and protection services for criminal organizations. Rex's behavior around certain officers confirmed Wade's suspicions about which personnel were involved in criminal activities. The dog's training sensitive enough to detect chemical residues and stress indicators that marked guilty parties. Wade filed encrypted reports to Captain Walsh while maintaining his cover identity, careful balance between gathering intelligence and avoiding detection by criminals who'd killed to protect their operation. Hudson's testimony at the corruption trial made national news as a story of courage and professional integrity that inspired honest cops and terrified dirty ones across the country. Wade watched coverage from his hotel room in Cedar Falls while Rex slept beside his chair, both of them taking satisfaction from justice served and criminals punished for betraying public trust. The federal task force's work was making differences in communities where local law enforcement had lost credibility. Honest cops returning to departments that had been cleaned out and rebuilt with oversight and accountability. Tyler's grades were improving under Mrs. Chen's patient tutoring, his pride in his father's work providing motivation for academic achievement that promised bright futures and expanded opportunities. Wade felt deep satisfaction that came from work that mattered to people who deserved better than they'd been getting from institutions that should have protected rather than exploited them. Rex's contentment was evident in his relaxed alertness and enthusiastic response to training exercises that kept his skills sharp and his mind engaged with challenges worthy of his intelligence and dedication. The final arrest in Cedar Falls came at dawn on a Tuesday morning that started like any other until federal agents surrounded the police station and mayor's office with authority that couldn't be bought or intimidated. Wade and Rex participated in the operation with professional satisfaction that came from months of patient investigation, finally yielding arrests and seizures that would cripple criminal operations for years. The corrupt police chief tried to run when he saw federal agents approaching his office, desperation driving him toward a back exit where Rex waited with calm determination to prevent escape. Wade felt pride watching his partner perform flawlessly under pressure, training and instinct combining to neutralize threat without unnecessary violence or drama. Tyler called that evening with excitement about news reports showing Dad and Rex on television as heroes who'd cleaned up corruption and made communities safer for honest families. Wade promised they'd be home soon for celebration dinner and normal life that now included purpose and respect that had been missing during their years of hiding from responsibility and opportunity. The commendation ceremony at federal headquarters celebrated successes that rippled through law enforcement agencies across multiple states, corrupt networks disrupted, and honest cops empowered to rebuild departments worth community trust and respect. Wade stood with Rex beside other task force members who'd risked everything to restore integrity to institutions that democracy required to function properly. Tyler sat with Mrs. Chen in the audience, his grin visible from across the auditorium as officials praised his father's courage and professional excellence. Captain Walsh presented awards with genuine pride in achievements that measured success not in arrests or seizures, but in communities where children could trust police officers to protect rather than exploit them. Wade accepted recognition with humility that came from understanding how many people had contributed to results that no single officer could accomplish alone. Rex wore his medals with dignity that seemed appropriate for Dog, who'd served faithfully through a career that spanned multiple agencies and countless operations, where his skills had made difference between success and failure. The new assignment came with promotion and increased responsibility, leadership role in expanding task force operations to regions where corruption had become endemic, and federal intervention offered only hope for restoration of legitimate law enforcement. Wade studied maps and intelligence reports that painted sobering pictures of communities where criminal organizations had captured entire police departments and municipal governments. Tyler would attend private school with resources for gifted students, educational opportunities funded by federal law enforcement salaries that provided stability and security Wade had never expected to achieve. Rex's reputation within federal circles had grown to legendary status, his success rate in detecting contraband, and evidence leading to requests for his services from agencies across the country. Wade felt the weight of responsibility that came with success and recognition, understanding that professional advancement meant greater expectations and more complex challenges that would test everything he'd learned about leadership and law enforcement. The future stretched ahead like highway under clear skies, destination uncertain, but direction clear, and purpose strong enough to sustain them through whatever obstacles lay ahead. Wade Thompson stood in his son's bedroom doorway, watching Tyler sleep, moonlight streaming through windows that no longer needed bars or security systems, because they lived in community where police officers could be trusted to protect rather than exploit innocent families. Rex lay curled at the foot of Tyler's bed, faithful guardian who'd transitioned seamlessly from working dog to family member without losing any of the intelligence and loyalty that made him exceptional partner. Wade thought about the journey that had brought them from hiding in anonymity to serving with purpose and recognition, corruption confronted and justice restored through patient work and collective courage. Hudson had returned to active duty with commendations and promotions that recognized her sacrifice and professional integrity, example for young officers who needed to see that doing right could lead to success rather than punishment. The federal task force continued expanding its mission into regions where local law enforcement had lost credibility, honest cops and dedicated dogs working together to rebuild trust between communities and institutions that served them. Wade closed Tyler's door softly and walked through house that felt like home in ways their cramped apartment never had, Rex following with quiet steps that spoke of contentment and purpose fulfilled through service that mattered to people who deserved better than they'd been getting from those sworn to protect them.